Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. And if you think it's problematic to have a winter pantry in Bellingham, Washington, you ought to try a winter pantry in Billings, Montana. It's even more limited, but the cheeseburgers are really good. So I am delighted to be here. Had a wonderful time last night meeting with some of the folks you've already been introduced to, and to a farmer and to enjoying Moses Lake. Those of you who are online, I see lots of you have your iPads and your smartphones out. It's fine with me as long as you like school meals that rock while we are talking this morning. Actually, I'm going to talk a lot more about social media issues in the workshop that I'm doing afterwards. What I've been asked to do this morning is just sort of lay out for you a big picture view of what's going on in the arena of farm to school, fresh foods in school, those kinds of things, and bring a perspective that's national. In doing that, I've become a huge fan of what's going on in Washington. I am absolutely a fan of Whatcom County. I love their videos, and I didn't know about Picky Pat, but now I do. So one of the things that I think I can bring to the table this morning is ideas and thoughts that come from other places. This is what School Meals That Rock looks like today, except now I'm up to 5,120. But this is what it looks like today because I've been featuring pictures from all across Washington. What I'm going to talk about, though, this morning is the whole issue of new nutrition guidelines. Those of you who work in schools know very well. Some of you have many sleepless nights in your recent months about the new nutrition guidelines. But how those can actually help in making the farm to school connection. Because I believe that although the new nutrition guidelines are problematic in some ways for districts, they present incredible fresh opportunities. And by the way, I happen to know that there are some people who aren't in schools but are in preschools. My friend Becky Van Pelt is here from the Tri-Cities. And these things were mostly, the new guidelines now apply to schools, but the thing that we know is that there are new guidelines coming down for CACFP. So the kinds of things I'm going to talk about today translate to Head Start, to child care programs, to all kinds of other programs in terms of making this farm to school connection work. So thanks very much to Joan, who you've already heard about. She held my hand, mentored me through getting here and getting to Moses Lake. And also thanks to Joan and all their staff, because this group really has done an incredible job. As I say, I get to travel all over the country, do this kind of work, and when I go to a state, I get familiar with what's going on. In addition to thanking the sponsors, I really want to thank those groups who are here today, and I especially want to thank School Nutrition Heroes. It was actually Sam Cass, who is the White House Assistant Chef, who coined the term School Nutrition Heroes. But what folks have to do with limited budgets and incredibly complex guidelines is really amazing. This is Molly Langham and her crew from Lake Stevens, Washington School District, and this is their Eat a Rainbow salad bar. They gave me one of those wonderful aprons, and I would wear it, but it doesn't look all that professional. By the way, I'm going to give copies of my slides. I like conserving paper and not handing out extra pieces that you may or may not use. But Joan and Ellen will have copies of PDFs of my slides for you to download and utilize. And I've tried to source all of the school information there. I also want to thank Farm and Ranch Heroes. I don't think until you live on a farm or live on a ranch, you recognize how hard people work, and especially in winter, how hard they work. My daughter spent a year on a sheep ranch in Montana, and I really learned what winter is like when lambs are giving birth and all those kinds of things. I actually grew up on we called it a ranch in California. It was 40 acres of grapes and watermelon. So the whole idea of farms and recognizing farmers and their contribution is something that I feel is in my genetics. I've just married that to my passion for what goes on in schools. I actually think this morning that there's so much good news that I have so little time to talk about it. We hear a lot about the bad news and this and that and things that aren't going well, but what is going on is incredible. That's a picture of a little boy at the Cloudview Farms that you see the banner for in the back of the room. The sense of wonder of look at these carrots is, I think, one of the things that we want to capture, but also from Mount Baker School District, how those foods and those kinds of carrots that get onto kids' plates. I'm going to bring you some pictures that aren't from Washington. This is actually from a district in Maine. That was their Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. All Maine products served on that. This was their Thanksgiving dinner this year to meet the new guidelines. And this is an incredibly creative director who made a turkey panini. So it was all the flavors and the layers. That's also an edamame cranberry relish. So taking the flavors that we're used to in terms of Thanksgiving, but building in some of these new guidelines. Again, all local foods from Maine. We were talking last night at the table, and I told Ellen the story about Jefferson County, Kentucky, where the director has a truck that goes out to get foods from local farms, but she at the same time markets that she's doing that. So this truck is driving around the county picking up products and taking them to their schools. And there's good news in Montana as well. I told you burgers are important in Montana. Indeed they are. This is Kalispell, Montana, who has now committed to completely locally sourcing their beef for a school district of 15,000 students. That's really critical considering that in Montana we don't have a single beef processor. So she had to work with her local ranchers in a very small processing plant to make the burgers exactly the right size to go on there. But again, this is, I can't swear about the ketchup, but everything else on that plate comes from northwestern Montana. So really this morning, in my keynote, I want to cover these three topics. That it is the best of times when we come to the idea of fresh foods in schools. Number two, that it's only nutrition when they eat or drink it. It doesn't help for this little boy to have an apple on top of his head. We hear apple a day. Well, not if it's on top of your head. It has to be in that child's body, and as you saw from the picture of the kid looking at the kale, they can be pretty darn suspicious about fresh foods. And then just quickly, some strategies for success. So I'm going to talk about these things for about 20 minutes or so, and then have 10 minutes to answer your questions. There is a big fork in the road, and there have been some significant changes. And I think Ellen outlined those. Just the fact that Whatcom County can stand up here and talk about all those things really indicates how much of a change there has been in our food systems. For people in schools, the big change has been the new USDA nutrition standards. So I consider those, although it's been very difficult, and I do not in any way minimize that, I consider those to be one of the pieces of the best of times for marrying fresh foods, local foods to schools. I am absolutely committed to the fact that school meals are incredibly important. Not just for kids' health, but they are incredibly important because of learning environments. And in fact, if you're talking to people in schools, their top of mind is not childhood obesity. Their top of mind is student performance. So figuring out how school meals affect those learning environments and being able to talk to folks about it. The equation really is quite simple. When kids eat healthy and play hard, they're better students. We have evidence to support that. In the eat healthy part, it's mostly about the benefits of school breakfast, which I will also talk about in a minute. But this is how we have to connect with schools. This needs to be the language that we talk to schools about. And schools have some significant problems. One is the whole issue of food insecurity. Feeding America did a survey, and 3 out of 5 K-8 public school teachers said that their students regularly come to school hungry. Some of those are the 17 million children who live in food insecure households. We just have to recognize that that's a reality and figure out how are we going to help kids get the food they need to concentrate, to perform well, and not to spend their time going to the school nurse's office. We also have to recognize that children in this country are undernourished. They may be overfed, they may be consuming too many calories, although just out today, the latest data from CDC, and what does it say? It says children are eating fewer calories. But it's the quality of those calories, what's in those calories. And there are 4 shortfall nutrients for kids in our country, actually for adults too, but vitamin D, potassium, calcium, and fiber. Those are things that we're not getting enough of. The thing is, they're also really simple to get into children, especially in something like a breakfast parfait. From Provo, Utah, this is actually a homemade granola, locally sourced berries, and yogurt. So a way to get in all of those nutrients and also something that's incredibly appealing. So to me, the whole issue is that in schools, what we need to focus on is ensuring that children are fit, healthy, and ready to succeed. That they come into every day ready, set, go. And that involves their food, it involves their physical activity, but for right now we're going to drill down a little bit into the nutrition piece and particularly into the new school meal patterns. I'm not going into the background in any detail, but essentially the new school meal patterns involve science. The overall goal, though, is very much the goal of My Plate. So where all that science led, where the legislation and then the regulations came to, is helping Americans eat in a different way that's outlined as My Plate. The most important piece, of course, is that half of the plate is fruits and vegetables. That's the really good news. That's the incredible opportunity for folks in this room. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You can see the complexity of these guidelines, but I want to highlight for you the things that are in bright yellow. And by the way, I will provide to Joan and to Ellen, along with my slides, the actual copy of this so that you can have a PDF of it. But if you look up at the top, we have breakfast first, and then we have lunch menus. And you can see they're divided up into 3 grade groups, K5, 6, 8, 9, 12, for each of those. What happened in the new guidelines is that fruits and vegetables, first of all, were separated out. They used to be together. Now there's separate requirements for fruits and vegetables. And if you look at breakfast, starting July of this year, there's a requirement that every child for breakfast must be offered a cup of fruit. So my challenge to you is, why not have that be a Washington state fruit that they are offered? And then in the lunch menu, you see their requirements for fruits. But then if you go down to vegetables, by the way, there's none required for breakfast. That doesn't mean you can't serve them. It just means they're not a requirement. But if you look at the vegetable component, you'll see that there is a total amount. And then just right below that, you'll see that vegetables are broken out into various subgroups. All of this is new to people. But all of this is opportunities for what you're gathered here to talk about today. You have in your folder, you don't need to get it out now because I'm not going to ask you to memorize it or to take a quiz on it, but this is the vegetable subgroups. So, and some people say to me, well, I don't understand these vegetable subgroups. Asparagus is in the other. Why isn't it in the dark green? These are as if they came down on tablets from a mountain. So USDA has put foods into these groups, and you can argue about it if you want, but bottom line, these are the groups that they're in. Now, they did move some things around. They moved edamame around, so, there may be some future in that. But these subgroups are all required in school meals. That's where your opportunity is, the requirement in breakfast for fruit, the requirement in lunch for all the subgroups. And school nutrition heroes are doing an incredible job with that. This is Robert Roussan. He is a chef, a school nutrition director in Missouri. And I often use him as an example because he is the director in a very low-income, high-risk district near St. Louis, and he has not only a school garden, but an outdoor pizza oven in his school. He not only sources local fruits and vegetables, but he sources local meats, local grains. He makes his own mozzarella cheese, so that the meals that come out of their kitchen look like this. Again, paninis. Why do I keep showing paninis? Because they're cool, because kids see them out in the rest of the world, and they like to have those things at school as well. Again, I think that most was locally sourced here, of course, except the banana. They don't grow those in Missouri. So, school nutrition heroes are taking advantage of these opportunities to serve kid-approved meals. But the problem is that these standards, although they may be based on science, and although they went through the political process and the regulatory process, is they meet real kids. So you take this set of guidelines, supposed to be looking like my plate, and the challenge is that kids are not used to eating this way. It's a huge step for children. So my mantra is, it's only nutrition when they eat or drink it. This is an actual tray that I took a picture of in Renaissance High School in Meridian, Idaho. It was actually chosen by a kid. You can see the kid's thumbs on the side. So a kid chose this nice Caesar salad with a bunch of vegetables. It was some frozen corn, but fresh fruit, apple juice. Anyway, a kid had chosen this meal, and I looked at it and I said, oh, can I take a picture? Which he let me do. He thought I was totally weird. But I then, from this tray, turned around and looked at this trash can. So, just serving it, just having the regulations, just serving it, just putting it on a tray, even a kid choosing it, doesn't mean it gets into the kid. And that's the problem. We need more fuel into kids and less food into trash cans. So what is the challenge we have? The challenge we have is that this is how kids and American adults are eating as well. The real challenge is that real kids are not meeting the goals for any of the things you see over there. They're not meeting their goals for fruits and vegetables, for the nutrients I told you that were of concern. They're eating way too many of these things at the bottom. You know what they are: sugar, salt, those kinds of things. But then we serve them food that meets that goal, and they don't eat it. They're not used to eating it. Some do, and some look as skeptical as that kid did about the kale. It's a gorgeous meal. From Provo, Utah. Again, it's a high school meal, and a lot of the vegetables there are locally sourced. They make their own whole grain breads. But think about the fact that in many high schools, kids only have 7 to 10 minutes to eat lunch. How are you going to eat that in that amount of time? Again, this is Georgia, but these are teen athletes going through a salad bar, loading up on wonderful things. How are they going to have enough time to eat that? This is my current favorite picture of school meals. It's from Bethel, Oregon, Bethel School District in Eugene, Oregon. Look at what she's chosen. It's gorgeous. Look at all the fruits and vegetables. I know they make their own pizza crust. They're using a low-fat cheese. It's a beautiful meal. Look at her teeth. How long is it going to take this little girl to eat that meal? A half an hour if you get her to focus? I mean, you know, it is problematic to get these foods into kids. So you may have heard the buzz about our kids hungry at school. Well, it's not a yes or no question. I don't have time to talk about all of these, but it's a very nuanced issue. Did they come to school hungry in the morning because they didn't have breakfast? Did they have recess before lunch, which we know is the right thing to do? Did they have enough time to eat? These are the kinds of questions that we have to ask. I'm very concerned about food being wasted at school. It's one of the things that is hard for me in general, but it's really hard, especially when I know the farmers and then I see that food going from the tray into the trash can. But whether food is wasted at school means it's not a black or white question. We can't force kids to eat things. We need to provide an environment which encourages that. And there are lots of pieces to that. It's not just regulation regulations in serving food. In fact, in Montana, we've done a lot of work on the idea of comfortable cafeterias, setting up an environment where kids enjoy eating and have the time to eat. The one I've seen that's best in the entire country happened to be in Tampa, Florida, where it was decorated with banners hanging where kids had half an hour to eat, where teachers were sitting down with them, encouraging them, and it was decorated like a French bistro on the walls. So we need to think about what it is that helps get food into kids. So we have incredible opportunities. But we have that challenge of meeting real kids and how food is served in schools. Well, I want to just finish up then with what I consider to be some strategies for success. So these are things to think about that need to be in place to get more of that fuel into kids and less into trash cans, in addition to the comfortable cafeterias. I'm leaving that bigger picture for now and just talking about the food. Some of you may have known that last year would have been Julia Child's 100th birthday. I remember when she threw chicken around on black and white TV and drank liberally while doing so. And I have fond memories of that. Maybe that's where I learned to cook. Anyway, this was one of her quotes. You don't have to cook fancy or complicated masterpieces, just good food from fresh ingredients. And it seems to me that that really encapsulates where we want to go with fresh foods in schools. It doesn't have to be fancy or complicated, it just has to be good food from fresh ingredients. So I want to talk about three fresh food strategies that four strategies that I see going on. Just again, briefly mentioning them. You can ask questions about them. I know a lot of the other folks here are going to be addressing those. This happens to be something that I saw as an actual plate, a paper plate, yes, and I asked the people who made it whether it was compostable, and they haven't gotten back to me yet. But a grower got together with some school districts in Arizona and actually came up with this idea. So on their salad bars, this is in Yuma, Arizona, kids get a plate which actually is the right size plate. So how do we get to the place where we want to be? Well, fresh food requires enormous culinary skills. And people who work in school kitchens, I heard the folks from Cheney talking about the training that had to go on. People who are in school kitchens don't necessarily have culinary skills like knife skills, like how to cut without cutting your finger off, how to use food processing, food safety and sanitation, just basic techniques. And it's not that people who work in schools are bad people, it's that most Americans don't. The average American doesn't have those food skills right now. By the way, I heartily recommend the book that this recipe came from. It is the Oklahoma Farm to School Cookbook. If you don't have it, get it. It's called Kitchen Expeditions. So it's all recipes from schools. This picture of this recipe is from my friend in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and it's called Underground Candy. It is all root vegetables, turnips, rutabagas, beets, sweet potatoes, with a light balsamic glaze. And she says when she serves it, they can't serve enough of it, that kids love to eat it. By the way, they did not have a neon sign that says rutabagas for lunch. So part of it is how we market things to kids, how we talk about it, and I have no problem calling something underground candy if it gets kids to eat rutabaga and beets. It's just fine with me. It's a play on words and it's wonderful. You need fresh food requires staff training. Again, people need to know how to handle fresh items safely. They need to have kitchen equipment. This is a woman in Haddon Middlefield School in New Jersey using a giant salad spinner to wash the fresh romaine lettuce they get from the Philadelphia Food Hub that has the name of the farm right on it. They wash it in their kitchen, and then on their grab-and-go salads in the middle school, it tells the kids where the lettuce for that salad came from. So it's making the connection all the way through. Fresh food requires scratch cooking, and some of you may just say, well, why can't they do that in schools? Well, one of the reasons they can't do that in schools is they very rarely have large, giant woks in school kitchens in order to stir fry. Can you stir fry in a tilt skillet? Sure you can, but it takes some effort. It takes knowing how to do it. It takes somebody training you. It takes recipe standardization. So all of this is things that schools need in order to be able to succeed. Fresh food isn't something that you can just whop out without any technique in terms of cooking or any herbs or spices. By the way, I now judge how much scratch cooking is going on in a school kitchen by how big their spice rack is. The bigger their spice rack, or if they have a window box of herbs, then you know that scratch cooking is going on. But it also takes flavor development from grilling, roasting, baking, and sauteing. Those are methods of cooking that preserve what we want in fresh foods and give it flavor. So here I am. I'm a huge fan of Whatcom and what they do. This was their Harvest of the Month that featured kale. It is, just to show you how on top of things, I know that it's frozen raspberries this month. That is the Harvest of the Month. So sometimes things are fresh foods that are minimally processed to be able to serve them, to be able to have frozen raspberries in February. But I don't need to tell you about this program because you saw it and heard it, but that's a really comprehensive program that has a bunch of people and some funding in terms of the community behind it. There are all sorts of ways to do the nutrition education that needs to go on. This is actually from Lake County, Montana. They got one of the fresh food and vegetable grants. This is a local artist they're working with. I love the fact that we grow cherries in Montana too. You may not know that coming from Washington. That they're cherries who wear sunglasses and beets who ride in rocket ships. You know, if we're talking to kids, we can't just be laying out, you know, cancer, because cancer isn't something that kids care a whole lot about. I mean, unless you're getting it this afternoon and it's interrupting your plans for the weekend, you know, not really on the top of their list. Veggie Girl was doing a fabulous job. So there are all sorts of ways to do the marketing and the pieces that go along with this. Taste of Washington is actually Molly Langham, who I already showed you. But right above there is a tray from Douglas County, which is just south of Denver. That's a Colorado Proud menu. So again, everything that came on that tray in September was Colorado Proud. Again, working and showcasing their farmers and ranchers for those products. This is another one, another project. This is from Bethel School District, the Willamette Farm to School Coalition, much like Whatcom. But I particularly like to show this because their Harvest of the Month was September, was melons and cantaloupe. And in Bethel School District, they market it as candylope. Now, again, I get pushback from some rigid nutrition people who say, you can't talk about candy. You shouldn't talk about underground cantaloupes. Really, folks? If you're moving kids from Skittles to melons, isn't it okay to talk about cantaloupes? I'm okay with that. Maybe, you know, someday in a perfect world we won't have to do that. But we have to think about how we talk about things, and then our marketing for kids needs to be student-centered. Not marketing it how we want to be marketed to or what we think is perfect, but what kids need. This pizza is from Douglas County. They got 10 high school students together to work on pizzas with a chef, whole grain crust, low-fat cheese, roasted vegetables with a balsamic glaze. When they serve this pizza in the high schools, their pizza sales go up 30%. Why? Because they got the kids to work on the product to have something that is marketed to kids. Student-centered marketing really brings kids into the process, and that's really where I'm going to finish up here. This is from Provo, Utah. They get their apples from Crandall Fruit Farm, and then they can actually sit in their school nutrition office and look at where the apples come from, because they're less than 5 miles away up on the hills. But this is a letter from a student from Abigail. Say, you cook the best and you clean really good. I was glad to see that she saw food safety as an important issue. I also like how you decorate the lunchroom on holidays. I like the rule of getting fruit because then at least we ate something good for our bodies. This was posted up on their Facebook page, and if you come to my workshop about social media, I'm going to talk about why this is such an awesome Facebook page, because all they did was take a picture of a letter that a little kid put up, but boy, is that excellent marketing for other kids, but for families as well. So student-centered marketing involves using menu and other communication tools. It involves using kid-friendly terms like candy loaf and underground candy. You may have read some of the research that says if you name them X-ray carrots instead of just carrots, the consumption of them goes up. It's certainly about presentation, and I believe in this day and age it's about having a strong social media presence. I'm sorry, if you're not online, you barely exist. So if you want to have something going on in terms of your marketing, if you want a buzz about what you do, you need to have that social media presence, and indeed that is what I will be talking about. So strategies for success are, and Julia Child knew this as well as anyone in the world. You realize that she was the original Food Network. She was the first person to go on TV and cook. She knew that it wasn't just about good food and fresh ingredients, it's about marketing. So marketing is really essential if we want to get more fuel into kids and less fuel into the trash can. Look at these fruit cups. I can't imagine that everybody would want one of these in Mount Desert's Island, Maine. Again, Molly Langham's group in Lake Stevens, working with kids to be the marketers. This is their Eat a Rainbow salad promotion, and the kids are out wearing different colors and chef's hats, and I would eat anything that the little boy in yellow asked me to eat. But getting kids involved means having them be out there helping to market things. These are both pictures from Hopkins, Minnesota. On the left-hand side, the girls are sampling hummus with carrots, and yes, she is dressed as a giant chickpea. It's a whole different deal. In Pawtucket, Rhode Island, they're going at it in a whole other way. These are actually young men who were trained over last summer to be fruit and vegetable ambassadors. So they work in the cafeterias to be ambassadors. The lady on the left over there is actually a farmer in Rhode Island who's helping to train the kids so that they can be better ambassadors. So it really is about getting kids involved. This is from Ellensburg Middle School, Washington, Kids in the Fuel Up to Play 60 program. I'm talking about toasting fresh and local foods. So it, to me, is absolutely essential to get kids involved so that we can improve learning environments. There are all sorts of school nutrition heroes out there. This is from Provo, Utah. On Veterans Day, they invite any parent who is currently in the service to come and eat free, and they're all eating local apples in front of kids in the cafeteria. I bet apple consumption went up a whole lot that day when their parents and their heroes were eating. So, if you want to be on School Meals That Rock, if you say, oh, I'm doing really cool stuff, why didn't you talk about me? Well, I just didn't talk about you because nobody sent me the picture. I talked about the places that did, that Joan sent to me, that Ellen Watcom I knew about because my niece went to school in Bellingham. But if you want me to know, if you want other people to know about it, if you want to be part of the buzz, just send me a picture, and if you've got one on your phone, send it to me today, and I'll put it up on School Meals That Rock before the end of the day. I realized that there's one other thing that I didn't talk about that I had as a show and tell in terms of getting kids involved, and that is never underestimate the power of kid artwork. I mean, first of all, viral marketing is just as popular these days as hiring a fancy PR agency. This is from Portland Public Schools. You can go online and see it. Portland Public Schools does a menu every year. They have a huge Harvest of the Month program. Not only is Portland Schools doing farm to school, but Portland Public Schools is about to have their own farm. So they are hiring a farmer to grow foods on Portland Public Schools land with a grant from USDA. But if you notice, as I flip through this, every page has student artwork on it. So whether it's decorations for a cafeteria, whether it is this, whether it's your Facebook page, really think about utilizing kids. They're much better at marketing to other kids than we are. Questions? Somebody in the back of the room was just waving to somebody. That wasn't a question. No questions? No comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
One of the things we briefly talked about last night that I found fascinating was the approach that Pat Cooper is doing and looking at sort of a comprehensive approach to wellness.
Thank you. So one of the things that I do is I work all over the country, and one of the places that I've worked a lot is Mississippi. One of the things about working in Mississippi is that when you're at the bottom of every list in America, there's no way to go but up. But people in Mississippi really have committed to and are really doing some amazing things. And there's a superintendent who was in Macomb, Mississippi. He happens to be in Lafayette, Louisiana now, but his name is Pat Cooper. You can Google him and see what he's doing. But Pat Cooper is one of several people who said, you know what, this isn't just about food in the cafeteria. And this isn't just about food, moving the cafeteria to the classroom. And this isn't just about food and physical activity. If we really want to consider wellness for kids, it has to be a coordinated, comprehensive school model. It has to develop a culture of wellness. CDC for a long time funded coordinated school health. That's their model. You can see it on CDC. Sadly, the funding has moved in other directions. But I was just at a healthology conference, healthology, great name, in Arizona. 900 people there, of administrators to PE teachers to kids, thinking about how are we going to have a comprehensive, coordinated model in schools. One of the things is that, if I may be so bold as to speak on behalf of the school nutrition people here, is that a lot of it gets dumped on them. Well, change what you're cooking, serve different food, and become the food police. Well, they don't want to be the food police. They got enough work managing those regulations on the budgets that they have. And by the way, teachers don't really like them coming into the classroom and saying you shouldn't be using Skittles as your reward. So if we're going to do things like this, they're one piece of the puzzle, and they're an important piece of the puzzle, but it's not all on their back. It's about PE, and by the way, it's not just about PE, it's also about walking and biking to school. There are all sorts of things that come into this from, I believe, mental health, physical health, emotional health, and that's how we need to think about it, as opposed to, and today you're here to talk about food and fresh foods in schools, but to begin to see that as part of a larger system is, I believe, how we have to do it. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any easily available models for taking that approach in school wellness policy?
Actually, school wellness policies are just in the process of sort of reinventing themselves. They were required in the 2004 Child Nutrition Act, and I would hazard a guess that 98% of school wellness policies are collecting dust on a shelf. So actually the implementation piece is the critical thing. I do have a couple of examples, and if you send me an email, schoolmeals@rock@gmail, I'd be happy to give you some indication of those. But Joan and I walked yesterday, and as we were walking, we were talking about school wellness policies in Wenatchee. And I said, it's not good enough to just have a policy. I mean, policy is words on paper. What you have to have is a culture of a wellness in a district that wants to embrace that, not that something that continues to be a fight. Because if it's a fight, it's honestly not going to happen. It has to be embraced from the district in terms of this is the kind of things we want to do, all the way from what happens when kids come to school in the morning to when they leave in the afternoon. You may also know that in addition to the school regulations that I talked about here and the opportunities here, this is a new opportunity. It's sort of farther out on the horizon, but I thought of it when I saw the packages of cut up fruit on the back corner over there. USDA has just put out the proposed rule for competitive foods. So that is the rule that will affect what goes on in a la carte lines, but also what's in vending machines, what can be sold in student stores, those kinds of things. And that will probably not go into effect, I'm being generous here, but I would say not till 2015. But why not be ready and ahead of the game there? And the same kind of thing is true for competitive foods, figuring out ways to do more fruits and vegetables and more whole grains and more of those kinds of things. Other questions or comments? Yes?
Do you know of any schools in the country that have school gardens off the school? I realize transportation, but if they were like a pre-tax idea, the big pre-tax.
There are lots of schools who have school gardens that are off the school campus because many school campuses don't actually have room, or like PS 146 that I went to in Manhattan, the school is all up like this and there's no play yard at all, it's all concrete. The best examples that I know of are schools that utilize a community garden space. In Shelby, Montana, they put in a community garden, but they put it close enough to the school so that the school actually has certain of the plots reserved for schools. So absolutely, that's one example I know right at the top of my head. But I would just Google school gardens and community, school and community gardens, and you'll see a lot of those pop up, because obviously it is a wonderful model. I think the other one that's very exciting is what's going on in Portland, and that is schools getting their own farms as a way to either utilize school grounds that aren't being used, and in some places, Portland is a good example, the school population is shrinking, so they have some unused playground spaces and those kinds of things, and they're going to turn those into farms that an actual farmer is going to farm. But in Philadelphia, for example, they have a high school that has a farm that's part of the educational process. FFA is one of the fastest growing organizations in the country because suddenly it's cool to have local fresh foods. So there are all sorts of models. Burlington, Vermont is actually buying up local farms where the farmer doesn't have a family to take it over. The school district is buying the farm and keeping it going, and all those things are coming into the schools as well as the schools using that for education. I don't see that there's one model that works for everybody, but I think seeing this issue of schools and food and kids, the bottom line for me is if they grow it, they will eat it. So if it's in a school garden, if it's in a school farm, if it's in window boxes, if kids have some connection with it, kids are so much more likely to eat kale and not be surprised about it if they helped to grow it and saw and participated in the whole process. So I'm not going to take any more questions now because you need a fluid adjustment break. And